The rain hammered against the windows of the downtown law office, with such force that Miranda thought the glass might shatter. She sat perfectly still in the leather chair, her hands folded in her lap, watching droplets race each other down the pane. Anything to avoid looking at the man across the mahogany desk, the man who had been her husband for 7 years, but now felt like a stranger wrapped in an expensive suit. "Miranda, are you even listening?" David's voice carried that edge of impatience she'd grown so familiar with over the past 2 years. "The lawyers need an answer." She turned from the window, meeting his eyes for the first time that afternoon. They were the same hazel eyes she'd fallen in love with in college, but the warmth had long since evaporated, replaced by something calculating and cold. "I heard you perfectly well. You want the house in exchange for a clean break. No alimony, no prolonged negotiations. It's more than fair," David said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "That house is worth considerably more than what you'd get in alimony over 5 years. And let's be honest, Miranda, you haven't exactly contributed to the marriage financially." The barb landed as intended. Miranda had given up her job as a marketing coordinator 3 years into their marriage when David's career as an investment banker took off. He'd insisted they didn't need 2 incomes, that she could finally pursue her passion for photography. What he'd really wanted was a wife who could attend his business dinners, host parties for his colleagues, and not ask questions about the late nights at the office. She'd found the text 6 months ago, nothing explicit, but enough to know that the distance between them wasn't just about his long hours or her supposed lack of ambition. There was someone else, probably more than one someone else over the years. When she'd confronted him, he hadn't even bothered to deny it. Instead, he'd suggested they were growing apart, and that these things happen. "I'll sign," Miranda said quietly, and watched surprise flicker across David's face. He'd expected her to fight, to negotiate, to make this difficult. That's what his lawyer had prepared him for during their last session. But Miranda was tired of fighting, tired of pretending, tired of living in a beautiful prison that smelled like his cologne and echoed with silence. Really, David couldn't quite hide his relief. "Well, that's good, smart. You'll be set up nicely, Miranda. The house alone will give you security." Security. As if security could fill the hollow space inside her chest where love used to live. But she nodded, signed the papers that his lawyer slid across the desk, and walked out of that office into the rain without an umbrella, letting the cold water soak through her coat. 3 weeks later, Miranda stood in the empty house that was now legally hers, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of a failed marriage. David had hired movers to collect his things while she was out, which felt appropriate somehow. Even in leaving, he'd avoided direct contact, communicating only through his lawyer and carefully timed text messages. The house was too big, too modern, too much everything. It had been David's choice, of course, selected for its impressive address and the statement it made about his success. Miranda had wanted something smaller, older, with character and a garden where things could grow. But like so many things in their marriage, her preferences had been noted and then quietly dismissed. She couldn't stay here. That realization came to her with absolute clarity as she walked through rooms decorated in shades of gray and white, everything carefully curated and utterly soulless. This house represented everything she'd lost herself in, every compromise that had chipped away at who she was until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The phone call to a realtor came easily after that decision. Within a month, she had an offer on the house, well above asking price. Apparently, the market was hot for modern architecture in prestigious neighborhoods. With the proceeds safely in her bank account, Miranda found herself with more money than she'd ever had in her life, and absolutely no idea what to do with it or with herself. She spent 3 days in a hotel room, scrolling through apartment listings and feeling nothing. Every place looked the same sterile efficiency apartments in the city, each one a smaller version of the life she was trying to escape. On the 4th morning, while drinking bad coffee from the hotel's breakfast bar, she overheard 2 women talking about a ranch in Montana they'd visited. "I'm telling you, Sarah, it was transformative," one of them said. "Something about the space, the quiet, the mountains. I felt like I could actually breathe for the first time in years." Montana. Miranda pulled out her phone and started searching, not really knowing what she was looking for. Guest ranches, vacation properties, land for sale. The images that filled her screen were so different from everything she'd known: rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, vast skies, wooden fences stretching toward mountains that looked like they touched heaven. One listing caught her attention. It wasn't a guest ranch or a vacation property. It was a working cattle ranch, family-owned for 3 generations, and it was in desperate need of investment. The description was straightforward, almost blunt. The owner, following his father's death, was drowning in debt and medical bills. He needed a business partner, someone willing to invest capital in exchange for a stake in the ranch. It was a risk, a gamble, possibly a terrible idea. Miranda clicked on the contact information before she could talk herself out of it. The response came 2 days later, a brief email from someone named James Thornton. He was direct and honest, laying out the ranch's financial situation in stark numbers. They'd lost cattle to a harsh winter, the equipment needed updating, there were outstanding loans against the property. But the land was good, the herd was recovering, and with proper investment, the ranch could be profitable again. He offered to show her the property if she was seriously interested, though his tone suggested he didn't expect much to come from her inquiry. Miranda bought a plane ticket to Montana. The flight gave her too much time to think, to question what she was doing. She knew nothing about ranching, about cattle, about living in a place where the nearest neighbor was miles away. This was insanity, a reaction to her divorce, a midlife crisis manifesting as a cowboy fantasy. By the time the plane touched down in Billings, she'd almost convinced herself to turn around and fly home. Except she didn't have a home anymore. That realization steadied her as she picked up her rental car and drove north toward the address James had provided. The ranch appeared after nearly an hour of driving through country so open it made her chest ache. Rolling grassland stretched in every direction, broken by clusters of pine trees and the distant silhouette of mountains. The ranch itself sat in a valley, a collection of weathered buildings that looked like they'd grown organically from the land itself. James Thornton was waiting by the barn, and Miranda's first thought was that he looked exactly like a rancher should look. Tall and lean with sun, weathered skin and eyes that were a startling blue against his tanned face. He wore work jeans, scuffed boots, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. As she parked and got out of the car, she noticed he was younger than she'd expected, probably close to her own age of 35. MS. Chen. His handshake was firm, his palm calloused. "Thanks for making the drive out. Miranda, please." She looked around, taking in the barn, the fenced pastures, the house set back from the other buildings. "It's beautiful here. It's home," James said simply, "or it has been. Come on, I'll show you around." He walked her through the property for the next 2 hours, pointing out fence lines that needed repair, showing her the herd grazing in the distance, explaining the cycle of the ranch year with a matter of fact competence that somehow made it all seem manageable. He didn't sugarcoat the problems. The roof on the barn leaked. Two of the tractors were held together with hope and baling wire. They'd need to hire seasonal help come spring, which meant paying wages they could barely afford. "Why not just sell?" Miranda asked as they stood, looking out over the pasture. "You could pay off the debts, start over somewhere else." James was quiet for a long moment. "This land has been in my family since my great-grandfather homesteaded it. My father spent his whole life working this ranch, and his father before him. When he got sick, the medical bills just kept coming. I thought I could handle it, thought I could work harder, make it work. Turns out, hard work isn't always enough. There was no pity in his voice, just a statement of fact." Miranda recognized something in his expression, a kind of quiet determination mixed with resignation. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was doing what needed to be done to save something that mattered. "What would you need to make this work?" she asked. James pulled a folded paper from his back pocket, worn from being carried around. "I had an accountant look at everything. This number would pay off the immediate debts, get us through winter, and leave enough for equipment repairs and operating expenses through spring. In exchange, you'd own 40% of the ranch. It's not a quick return on investment, but if we have a good couple of years, you'd see profit." Miranda looked at the number. It was roughly a third of what she had from the house sale. A significant amount, but not devastating if things went wrong. "And if it doesn't work, if the ranch fails, then we both lose," James said honestly. "You lose your investment, I lose my family's land. That's the risk." She should have asked for time to think, to have lawyers review contracts, to do proper due diligence. Instead, she found herself saying, "When would you need the money?" Surprise flickered across James's face. "You're actually considering this?" "I'm considering a lot of things I never thought I would," Miranda said. "Can I see the house?" The house surprised her. From outside, it looked like all the other buildings, weathered wood, a wide porch, functional and plain. Inside, it was unexpectedly warm. The furniture was worn but comfortable, the kitchen old-fashioned but clean, and everywhere there were signs of the people who had lived here. Family photos on the mantel, a quilt draped over the back of the couch, books lining shelves in what looked like a small office. "My mother made that quilt," James said, noticing where her gaze had landed. "Took her 2 years. She finished it the winter before she passed." "When did she die?" 10 years ago, cancer." He moved to the kitchen, pulled 2 mugs from a cabinet. Coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, and James laid out his proposal in detail. She would invest the capital needed to stabilize the ranch. He would continue to manage day-to-day operations, making decisions about the herd, the land, the business. They would split profits according to their ownership percentages. If either of them wanted out, they'd have to give the other first right of refusal on buying out their share. "Where would I live?" Miranda asked. James looked surprised by the question. "You'd want to live here?" "If I'm investing in a ranch, I should probably be at the ranch." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "Unless that's a problem." "No, it's just, I figured you'd be a silent partner. Most investors don't want to actually live in the middle of nowhere." He gestured toward the ceiling. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs. You'd have your own space, but I should be honest, Ms. Chen, Miranda, this life isn't easy. Winters are hard, the work is constant, and the nearest town is 20 miles away. No theaters, no restaurants, no social scene. It's not what most people from the city would choose. Most people from the city aren't looking to completely rebuild their lives." Miranda said quietly, "I need something different, James, something real. I spent 7 years in a marriage where everything was about appearances, about status, about climbing some ladder I never cared about climbing. I want to wake up and know that the work I'm doing matters, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." Something shifted in James's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I can't promise this will fix whatever you're running from." "I'm not running from anything," Miranda said. "I'm running toward something. I just don't know what it is yet." They talked until the sun set, working through details and logistics. James would have his lawyer draw up partnership papers. Miranda would arrange for the funds transfer. She'd go back to the city, settle her affairs, and return in 2 weeks. As she drove away from the ranch that evening, she watched it disappear in her rear-view mirror and felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Miranda sold her car, closed her storage unit, donated most of her belongings to charity. She kept only what would fit in 6 boxes: her camera equipment, her clothes, some books, and a few photographs from her life before David. Everything else could stay behind. Her friends thought she'd lost her mind. Her mother cried and asked if this was some kind of breakdown. Even her divorce lawyer called to make sure she understood she was making a major financial decision in an emotionally vulnerable state. Miranda listened to all of them, thanked them for their concern, and kept packing. The morning she flew back to Montana, she woke up at dawn and watched the sun rise over the city one last time. Somewhere down there, David was probably getting ready for work, kissing whoever had replaced her, living his carefully constructed life. She felt nothing when she thought of him now, no anger or regret, just a distant sadness for all the time they'd wasted trying to be something they weren't. James picked her up at the airport in a battered pickup truck that rattled and wheezed but ran. "Welcome back," he said, loading her boxes into the truck bed. "Ready for this?" "Not even remotely," Miranda admitted, "but I'm here anyway." The first month was harder than she'd imagined. The work started before dawn and didn't end until after dark. James set her up with tasks that didn't require years of experience: fixing fences, mucking out stalls, helping to move cattle from one pasture to another. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands developed blisters and then calluses. She fell into bed, each night too exhausted to think. But something was shifting inside her. The physical exhaustion was clean, earned through real work rather than emotional stress. The silence that had terrified her at first became comforting. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the sound of cattle lowing in the morning, the way James moved through tasks with an efficiency born of decades of practice. They didn't talk much at first. James was a man of few words, communicating mostly through demonstration and the occasional grunt of approval when she did something right. But gradually, as the weeks passed, conversations began to happen, over morning coffee, during long truck rides to check fence lines. In the evenings, when they were both too tired to do anything but sit on the porch and watch the sun set. She learned that James had left the ranch once, tried college for 2 years before his mother got sick and he came home. He'd planned to go back, but then his father needed help, and the years slipped by. He'd been engaged once, to a woman from town who lasted 6 months on the ranch, before admitting she couldn't handle the isolation. "She wanted me to sell, move to town, get a normal job," James said one evening. "I couldn't do it. This ranch, this life, it's who I am." She couldn't understand that. Miranda understood. For the first time in years, she was becoming someone instead of pretending to be someone. Winter came early and hard. The first snow arrived in November, and by December they were buried under 3 feet of powder. The work became even more demanding, feeding cattle in sub-zero temperatures, breaking ice on water troughs, making sure the herd stayed healthy in brutal conditions. Christmas approached, and Miranda realized she had nowhere to go, no one expecting her. Her mother had reluctantly accepted her decision, but made it clear she thought Miranda was making a mistake. Her friends had drifted away, uncomfortable with her new life. "You could go somewhere," James said on Christmas Eve as they finished evening chores. "Visit someone. I can handle things here for a few days. I'm where I want to be," Miranda said, and realized it was true. They spent Christmas Day working like any other day. But that evening James surprised her by cooking dinner. Nothing fancy, just steak and potatoes and vegetables from the store in town. But he'd set the table and opened a bottle of wine. "Figured we should mark the day somehow," he said, almost embarrassed. "My mother always insisted on Christmas dinner, no matter how much work there was." They ate slowly, talking about plans for the spring, about repairs that needed to be made, about whether they should expand the herd or focus on quality over quantity. The conversation was practical, focused, but underneath it was something else. A partnership that had become friendship. A working relationship that was shifting into something neither of them had quite acknowledged yet. It was Miranda who finally broke the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something? Why did you agree to this? To bringing me on as a partner? You could have found other investors, people who actually knew something about ranching." James refilled their wine glasses, considering his answer. "Honestly, because you were the only one who seemed to understand what this place means. Everyone else who contacted me saw dollar signs or a tax write-off or some romantic fantasy about cowboy life. You saw a chance to build something real, and you didn't pretend to know more than you did." "I didn't know anything," Miranda said with a laugh. "Exactly. You were honest about it. That matters." He met her eyes across the table. "You've worked harder than I expected. Most people would have quit by now." "I don't quit," Miranda said quietly. "Not anymore. I spent too many years staying in something that wasn't working because I was afraid of what people would think if I left. I won't make that mistake again." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were both survivors in their own ways, both rebuilding from loss, both learning to trust again. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting in patches to reveal the brown earth beneath. As the ground thawed, work intensified. They spent days repairing winter damage, checking cattle for new calves, preparing for the busy season ahead. Miranda had learned so much over the winter. She could now fix a fence line without supervision, knew how to read the weather by the color of the sky, could spot a sick animal from across a pasture. Her photography, which she'd almost forgotten about, had found new purpose. She began documenting the ranch, the land, the changing seasons. The images were different from anything she'd done before, raw and honest and beautiful in their simplicity. One evening in April, after a particularly long day, James found her on the porch with her camera, capturing the last light on the mountains. "Can I see?" he asked, sitting beside her. She handed him the camera, watching nervously as he scrolled through recent images. His father, with his hand on a fence post, the expression on his weathered face, both proud and sad, a newborn calf taking its first steps. The barn silhouetted against a winter sunrise. James working, his face in profile, focused and calm. "These are incredible," James said quietly. "You've captured something. I don't know. The truth of this place, maybe. It's a beautiful place," Miranda said. "I didn't see it at first. I was too busy being scared and overwhelmed. But now, James prompted when she trailed off. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." They sat in silence as darkness fell, the comfortable quiet of two people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. Miranda was intensely aware of James beside her, of the warmth of his arm nearly touching hers, of the way his presence had become something she looked forward to rather than something that made her nervous. The moment broke when James stood, stretching his back. "Long day tomorrow." We've got that meeting with the equipment dealer about the new tractor. Right. Miranda said, trying to hide her disappointment that he was leaving. Good night, James. He paused at the door. Miranda, I'm glad you answered that ad. I'm glad you're here. He was gone before she could respond, but those words stayed with her, warming her more than the spring evening warranted. The months that followed were marked by steady progress. The new tractor arrived, bought with careful budgeting and Miranda's investment. The herd grew stronger, healthier. 2 seasonal workers were hired for the summer months, young men from town who knew ranching and were grateful for the work. The ranch was succeeding. More than that, it was thriving. By late summer, as they reviewed the accounts, it was clear they'd turned a corner. The investment was paying off, and if things continued, they'd actually show a profit by year's end. We did it, James said, looking at the numbers with something like wonder. I didn't think. I hoped, but I didn't really believe we could pull it off. We make a good team, Miranda said, and she meant it in ways that went far beyond business. The acknowledgement hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. They'd been dancing around it for months, this growing awareness of each other that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with the way James smiled at her across the breakfast table, the way her heart jumped when he walked into a room, the careful way they avoided physical contact, as if both knew that one touch might ignite something neither was quite ready to handle. It was late September when everything changed. They'd spent the day moving cattle to higher pasture before winter, hard work that left them both exhausted and filthy. As they unsaddled the horses, a sudden rainstorm swept down from the mountains, drenching them in seconds. They ran for the barn, laughing like children, and stood dripping in the doorway, watching the downpour. Miranda was acutely aware of James beside her, water streaming down his face, his shirt plastered to his chest. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Miranda," he said, and there was a question in the way he said her name. She answered by reaching for him, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. The kiss was inevitable, necessary, right in a way nothing had been right in years. He tasted like rain and coffee, and something uniquely him. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt pieces of herself she didn't know were broken start to heal. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for months. Then why didn't you?" "Because you came here broken, running from something. I didn't want to be a rebound or a mistake or something you'd regret when you healed." Miranda pulled back enough to look at him properly. "I didn't come here to hide, James. I came here to find something real, and this." She gestured between them, at the barn, at everything. "This is the most real thing I've ever had." They took things slowly after that, learning each other the way they'd learned the rhythms of the ranch. James was patient and gentle, a complete opposite to David's aggressive confidence. He asked what she wanted, listened when she spoke, made her feel seen in ways she'd forgotten were possible. By the time the first snow fell in November, Miranda's bedroom had become their bedroom. By Christmas, James had nervously presented her with a simple silver ring. "It's not an engagement ring," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon for that, and I don't want to pressure you, but I wanted you to have something that says you belong here, with me, if you want to." Miranda slipped the ring on her right hand, admiring how it caught the light. "I want to." The second winter was easier than the first, made warm by shared blankets and whispered conversations in the dark. They made plans for the ranch, for their future. In spring, they'd expand the herd. In summer, they'd repair the old bunkhouse and hire more help. In fall, if all went well, they'd finally pay off the last of the debts. but more than the practical plans, they dreamed together. About children someday, about growing old on this land they both loved, about building a life that was theirs in every way that mattered. One evening in February, as they sat by the fire after dinner, James pulled out a folder of papers. "I had the lawyer draw these up, a revised partnership agreement." Miranda took the papers, confused, and read through them carefully. Instead of the 40-60 split they'd originally agreed on, the new agreement proposed a 50-50 partnership. "James, I can't accept this. The ranch is your family's land. My investment doesn't equal that. Your investment saved this ranch," James said firmly. "Without you, I'd have lost everything my grandfather and father built. But more than that, you've worked as hard as I have, maybe harder, to make this place succeed. You belong here, Miranda, not as an investor or a business partner, but as an equal, as the person I want to build a future with." "What are you saying?" He took her hands in his. "I'm saying that when you're ready, if you're ready, I want to make this official, all of it. The partnership, the relationship, the future. But first, I want you to know that whatever you decide, you're my partner in every sense of the word." Miranda looked down at the papers, then at the man in front of her. A year and a half ago, she'd been sitting in a lawyer's office, signing papers that ended a marriage built on shallow foundations. Now, she was holding papers that represented something entirely different, a partnership built on honesty, hard work, and genuine respect. "Ask me," she said quietly. Whatever you're working up the courage to ask me, just ask." James smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his entire face. He slid off the couch, kneeling in front of her, and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Miranda Chen, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in every sense, for the rest of our lives?" The diamond was small and simple, set in a delicate band that looked nothing like the ostentatious ring David had given her all those years ago. It was perfect, yes, Miranda said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, to all of it. They were married in spring on the ranch, with wildflowers blooming across the hills and the mountains standing witness. The ceremony was small, just a few friends from town, and James's aunt and uncle. Miranda's mother came, and though she'd been skeptical at first, even she had to admit there was something right about the way James looked at her daughter, something solid and true. As they exchanged vows on the land they both loved, Miranda thought about the journey that had brought her here, the failed marriage that had felt like an ending but was really a beginning, the heartless deal she'd thought she was making, investing money for a financial return, that had instead given her something infinitely more valuable. The choice James had made, to take a risk on a woman from the city who knew nothing about ranching, but everything about starting over. Sometimes, she thought, as James slipped the ring on her finger, the best things in life come from the ruins of what we thought we wanted. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what we really need. Sometimes a failed marriage and a desperate business deal lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. The reception lasted until sunset, when the last of their guests drove away down the long gravel road. Miranda and James stood on the porch of the house that was now truly theirs, watching the sky turn purple and gold above the mountains. "No regrets?" James asked, pulling her close. Miranda leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. She thought of David and the gray house and the empty years, and then she thought of everything she had now. Not just the ranch or the financial success they'd built together, but the quiet mornings, the shared work, the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged with exactly who she was meant to be.